Good afternoon. Thank you very much, all of you, for accepting me here and for being here. I know that the end of the term is always a very, very busy time for students and for staff. And already I have learned a lot from students here about cultural rights in Poland, and I'm looking forward to learning more. But I would like to thank Professor Schreiber for persevering with getting me to Warsaw and for proving to me that indeed part of the Polish culture is to be the best hosts one would hope for. There is no doubt that today we face a revival of populist politics. Populism as an ideology depicts the people as being under threat by corrupt, ego-centered, and disconnected elites. Populists advocate for the collapse of corrupt society structures and hierarchies, for the common people to come to the front of politics, for real democracy, as they call it, or for free speech. And paradoxically, in a way, populism is at the same time linked to the defense or nostalgia of a homogeneous nation, inciting xenophobic outlooks, because this is what people really want. Populism often says that it is just democracy, and the democracy is what the majority want. And I get really annoyed with that, because of course human rights are not down to majority. The majorities do not necessarily care about the fate of marginalized and vulnerable. Very often they care about them not becoming the marginalized and vulnerable. And it is the states that have the obligation, not good practice, not aspiration, the legal obligation to take measures to ensure that populism does not lead to the restriction of human rights. So saying, giving arguments such as, what can we do, this is what society wants, or what can we do, we're trying, but unfortunately we're failing, means that a state becomes weak and it's a failed state. Populism, characterized by its dynamic appeal to the people against perceived elite or establishment forces, has gained significant traction worldwide. And again, what is interesting is that it is very often people who would be considered by everyone as part of the elite, the political elite, the economic elite, that talk about how, the elites have been saying, have been using the human rights language, and now it's time for the real people to talk. So, for example, in the UK, where I live, recent months have seen the erection of St. George flags in the high streets of many towns and in the motorways, especially at crossroads. On the face of it, there is nothing wrong with using one's flag. Flags are important cultural symbols representing the national identity. And this flag is a national emblem of England, symbolizing its history, values, and sense of belonging. But what Wikipedia will not tell you, and what AI tools will not tell you, is that this flag, the St. George's flag, also has a different, unfortunate cultural reference. Used by the National Front, so the extreme right, for many years, it has become to represent in popular culture the voices for, quote, the real English people, who must squash the foreigners who change the composition of the English culture and the English society, and who are responsible probably for everything bad happening in the UK at the moment. Of course, it's not Brexit. St. George's flag has become a symbol of me, an immigrant, being sent back to my country. Culture and populism, unfortunately, work together in this situation. In Greece, Recent past legislation ensures that 45% of all music listened to in public spaces is Greek or in Greek by Greek composers. I have asked who is a Greek composer and who is a Greek singer. Is Melina Mercouri a Greek singer? Was Demis Roussos a Greek singer? And when we talk about Greek music, do we also mean trap music that dehumanizes women, and most of the lyrics or some lyrics refer to, the violence and violation of human rights? Is the Greek state going to ensure that, this music is within the 45% imposed music to be listened to in all public places because it is Greek music? And the justification that I got was that this is to defend the Greek language from the current threats. Which threats? Statistics suggest that the Greek language has been used by the same number of people today that was used 100 years ago. So what is this threat that pushes an already monocultural state to become even more monocultural? Oh, they say it is to protect the culture. We're doing that because this is what UNESCO has told us, this is what we have signed up. So really, what do we mean by protection of the culture? In Serbia, the state has decided to destroy monuments of a bleak past so that people do not remember parts of the history. If this is not engineering, I don't know what is. So I would argue that undeniably culture has helped populism. So I don't think that culture has lost to populism. Culture, not now, but for many centuries, was part of the tools that populism has used. Culture can be an elitist, top-down art that aims to celebrating the national successes only. Culture that looks at us being special, different, always winning, being the heroes, versus the other, the barbarians. Culture that incites moral panic, which says that we have too many threats and we would be open to other ideas and other cultures, but these are special times, and we have to defend ourselves and defend our culture vis-à-vis the threat we now face. And the alleged threat or the real threat changes, and cultural rights as part of human rights that, very concretely the Dean said, continue to be restricted, and we continue to go steps back, and states continue to avoid the legal obligations they have signed to and they have undertaken when they signed the treaties. So let's be honest, our states, all states, have been pushing for these restrictive, static, suffocating understandings of culture for centuries. Culture that views women as something lesser. How often do we hear feminism, where I grew up? Feminism, we are the Balkans here. What do we mean feminism? Western Europe has these ideas. Or our men are our heroes. Culture that has denied homosexual people their equal rights for centuries. We don't care what the EU says. We are different. The majority of the society does not want that. Culture that swept under the carpet the weaknesses of the people and create narratives of the heroic nation. The great idea that we say in the Balkans. Culture that views disabled people as something lesser, something that we have to protect. or a purely medical issue. So what I argue is that this simplistic understanding of politics as giving power to people to say and do whatever they want, this push to put expertise, knowledge, nuances aside in the name of what people want or speak truth to power is a facade. It is a facade for yet another form of exclusion, another form of prejudice, another form of exploiting people's fears and concerns. It is a facade for not implementing human rights. But maybe we, human rights defenders, also have a role to play in this. Maybe we, human rights defenders, are also responsible to the extent for the rise of populism. Very often, we make clear distinction between the cultures of the people and we, as messiahs, who are going to tell the people what the human rights should be. We are going to save the migrant women because they don't know. We know best. We are going to impose our modern way of life to newcomers who, unfortunately, they didn't have the education. Distinctions of class, the difference between the capital vis-à-vis the rural people, distinctions of majority and minorities, of cultured and uncultured, who can decide and can be in boards or not, distinctions of high culture, I go to opera, and everyday popular culture, graffiti should always be erased. Rap, what is that all about? And the preconceived stand that we, the experts, the human rights saviors, the human rights heroes, are the ones with a noble knowledge, and they, the people, are the ones who are simple, swayed by populism, and in need of enlightenment. We saw that in Mondia Cult. In Mondia Cult, we, the enlightened, were on the one part of the city, and the civil society and the rest of the people were at the other end of the city. And they too did not meet really. Let's face it, populism that goes against human rights may indeed be winning also because of the elitism that many of us show, the elitism that disrespect and exclude the real, the different, the varied, the common, the alternative. In this respect, maybe we should not talk about populism. Maybe we should talk about the way our democracies function, because they're still far from being cultural democracies in which people really participate with a cultural rights approach. We should try to understand what different people with different experiences want, what they offer, and how to combine different knowledge and visions. This is, in essence, the cultural rights approach. This, I would argue, is the cultural rights revolution that some of us have started. According to Article 15 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, as interpreted by General Comment 21, culture is a broad, inclusive concept encompassing all manifestations of human existence. The expression cultural life is an explicit reference to culture as a living process, historical, dynamic, evolving, with a past, a present, and a future. The committee that created and adopted this general comment has emphasized that the concept of culture must be seen not as a series of isolated manifestations in compartments, but as an interactive process whereby individuals and communities, while preserving their specificities and purposes, give expression to the culture of humanity. This concept takes account of the individuality and otherness of cultural frameworks as the creation and product of society and societies. So if we take this understanding of culture, culture cannot really lose to populism. Culture is encompassing. Cultures are our ways of life, our values, and the objects that express these values. Culture is the way we see and interact with our world, our environment, and our practices and philosophies. Culture is knowledge and lessons and triumphs and weaknesses and losses and bad decisions of the past. And this understanding of culture, a more inclusive and encompassing, leads and aims to cultural democracy, which must be distinguished from populism. So I move now to cultural rights, which maybe should be the basis of this discussion. So the meaning of cultural rights in contemporary societies and why they're important. So accordingly, cultural rights protect not only the big monuments of our societies, not only the big ideas, and not only the heroic narratives. Cultural rights protect the development and expression of all cultural identities. At their core, they empower individuals and groups to express their humanity, worldviews, and the meanings they attribute to their existence and development through various forms of human expressions. So cultural rights do not only talk about the right to cultural heritage and the right to artistic freedom. They include rights to the arts, cultural heritage, languages, but also rights to sciences and how sciences can be really inclusive, knowledge, convictions, religions and beliefs, sports and games, rites and ceremonies, production methods, technology, institutions and livelihoods, and many other elements such as food, the environment, and dress. And they encompass the rights to access, but most importantly, rights to participation in heritage and resources that facilitate these processes of identification and development. And it is this broad understanding of cultural rights that I have tried to serve with my reports to the States and the United Nations. So my reports have focused on sports and the right to participate in sports. And I was and a lot of kind of people in the so-called cultural sector felt that, that this was a very peculiar decision. But what I wanted to show is that sports is also part of our ways of life, and the right to participate in sports should not only refer to the elite athletes, but should refer to everyone who just wants to participate in leisurely activities, in exercise, etc. So it was from the top-down approach, where until now human rights focused on elite players, to bottom-up approach, where we talked about the perceptions of the female bodies. We talked about the exclusion of trans from specific categories. We talked about the continuing prohibition of France to allow women to play sports while wearing their hijab, etc. That's why I also had a report on the right to sciences. And it was not the report to science. It was the report on the right to participate in sciences. And in that report I said that scientists are not only the, PhD holders that work in labs and, go very often to dine and lunch with, the powers to be for the next grant. But sciences and scientists are also the indigenous peoples, those who could have given us their knowledge, their sciences, on how to isolate ourselves during the lockdown, because they had great experience of that, but we never asked. In actual truth, New Zealand was the only state that asked indigenous communities for their knowledge on how to isolate. So I also had another report, two reports actually, one on digitalization and AI, where again I talked about how AI and digitalization are not neutral processes, and we should move away from the myth that big transnational corporations want to say to us that AI is going to give us this transformational, amazing life. AI can be very, very good if used in the service of human rights, not despite human rights. But in all of my reports, one theme that I hope I have is participation. And a lot of states want to continue to discuss about access, so the rights of people to access cultural resources, but they don't talk about the rights of people to participate and to have their contributions in these cultural resources. So first of all, in Mondial Cult, it was getting a bit frustrating. States continue to talk about culture and how they protect the culture. But now the students of the previous hour know and can tell you that when we talk about the protection of culture that UNESCO does is something different to the protection to the right, to the cultural right, which is what the UN does. And the two, of course, have to come together. But states are very eager to use human rights to protect state rights, and I think that we have to resist to that. Most importantly, states have to take specific measures to ensure that everyone has the right to participate in culture, not just citizens, not just the people who look like us, and not just the people who have ideas like ours. So participation has a key role to play in culture as an enabler of development. And this is exactly what cultural rights should be: development as a bridge between universality and diversity. No diversity without cultural rights, no true universality of human rights without protection for cultural diversity. There is no one narrative that states have to protect and to hold on. There are a series of narratives, and it is through discussions that we can move on and we can be respectful of our histories and our past. How does this all materialize when it comes to Poland? So one of the main reasons why I came here was because there was a visit to Poland by the former Special Rapporteur in the field of cultural rights, Karima Benune, in 2020. And you know, sometimes we write these reports and, I don't know, they get to virtual cupboards and they stay there, and we have about 2 minutes to talk about these reports with the states, and then I do wonder what is happening with these reports. So I'm writing now the report from my visit to Laos and the report from my visit to Micronesia, and there's so much effort and so many resources that have gone to all visits that there really are tools to be used to sway governments and states to act upon the implementation of cultural rights. So in 2020, the Karima Benune came to Poland and experienced and discussed in the report several issues. And I think that the main issue that comes out of this report is implementation, implementation, implementation. And I think that we all have a role to play to ensure that states do not get away with the human rights obligations they have undertaken. So first of all, I think that we have to take practical measures on the definition of cultural rights. How open is the society on these broader understandings of culture? Does the state protect only the cultures or also the right of individuals to participate in the different cultural resources and frameworks? Especially in times of tension, we see that states are very eager to protect the big museums, the big libraries, the big projects, but they're not as eager to protect the minority cultures, especially when these minorities are identified or have sided with the enemy in nearby wars. So as I said, we are not, in Greece, I keep saying this to kind of Greeks, they don't like it. In Greece, we are not just to protect the cultural frameworks of the Greeks and the cultural resources of the Greeks. We also have to protect the mosques that Turks created. Another question to ask, does the state protect the right of individuals to their values? Does the state allow that certain sections of the population are dehumanized or undermined? And has the state taken specific measures to ensure, maybe campaigns, media campaigns, maybe interactions, maybe meetings, even in cemeteries, meetings of different people in places where they can discuss. I said cemeteries because of a comment in the previous meeting. Does the state allow that certain sections of the population are seen as inferior? So in Europe we have the so-called problem of migration. Does the state have specific campaigns where it informs the people on the value of migration? And I don't just talk about the value, the economic value. So in the UK, for example, the government has said, how many money the migrants bring to the state. But they didn't say that migrants have pushed for fresh new ideas, for the reevaluation and the discussion of old ideas, the discussion of what we mean exactly by gender identity, what we mean about family and how we perceive family, how we perceive gender equality. So it is not just, but also new foods. I mean, it is the UK, we needed food from the migrants. So, new food, new cultural celebrations, richness in the diversity of cultural resources. So I would wonder, whether this has also happened in Poland, whether there are specific steps that the government has taken since 2020 to stop the undermining of specific cultures. Does the government recognize intersectionality? So I, as a European woman with a good job, face a very different level of discrimination from the migrant, domestic worker, female person in Greece. So I think that, the government has to take measures to ensure that, it's not just generic policies for women, but specifically different categories of women. Has the government taken measures about censorship and self-censorship in many parts of Europe, and something that Karima Bennoune has mentioned in her report in 2020, we see that artists have to self-censor their arts, either to self-censor it so that they don't have huge backlash, or in order to be able to get the funding, because otherwise, they're not going to get the funding. So in some states, having a very clear political message actually gets you the funding, and in other states, having a message actually stops you from getting funding. So what are the discussions that the state has on these issues? And also, what is the discussion ongoing in the state when it comes to development processes and cross-cultural, cross-section themes? So, for example, in this new understanding of culture, development processes have to include the visions, priorities, and values of everyone. So what has the government done in order to ensure that this is the case? The second part that I would push, and I would ask for a follow-up to Poland, would be on the right to participate. So on grants, who decides when, on the basis of which criteria, who sits at the decision-making bodies, how many women, but most importantly, how many migrants? Migrants are artists as well. How many minorities? How many persons with disabilities? In big museums, who decides what kind of exhibits are going to be put up in these museums? In the museums that show the history and the current arts, who decides what is going to be portrayed there? So, for example, are minorities, do they have their section, or are they included? Are minority women included in these national galleries or in these museums? Are their voices heard? And who does the narration? Who puts down the signs that say, you know, what each section, each exhibition is trying to do? And what are the voices of the local communities? And how are they being fed to the cultural policies of the state? And who identifies who is the vulnerable voice? Because, for example, if we listen to Farage in the UK, or if we listen to extreme right, or extreme right voices, the vulnerable parts of the population apparently are the majority. But this is not in sync with human rights understandings of who is a minority. So who decides? Who curates the exhibitions in big national museums? When I was in Germany, they told me that in the big museums they have a champion, a diversity champion, one person for the main museums, each one of the main museums. Is this enough, like one champion? And what does it mean, a champion? Do we really mean participation by just having a champion? So the tokenistic approach, the token brown person who is going to be the champion for diversity? And more importantly, what are the narratives and the politics of history? And how does the state ensures that, you know, there are ways to negotiate these different narratives and politics? And finally, diversity. What does the state do about anti-discrimination education, including with regard to minorities, women, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender persons, and persons with disability, that is offered in schools? But what about the anti-discrimination education outside schools? The discrimination, the education for my mother, who is 95 and adores my friend who is gay, but if you ask her about gay people, she's going to really be very negative. So who does this education? It is up to the state to do these campaigns, and it is up to the state to push these messages. And in essence, to which degree does the state accept and celebrate diversity? And to which respect and to which degree does the state put a stop to hate speech and to measures that dehumanize people, or to campaigns that demonize specific parts of the population, or stop specific discussions? Again, I'm going to talk about Germany. Germany for a whole year has stopped any public discussions on Gaza. Is this really kind of, and I was at when the Gaza war started, I was in the US, and the discussions on the media that I was watching, were about how people in Gaza and Palestinians are the new ISIS, not Hamas, Palestinians. What is the role of the state in these discussions? And to which extent is the state tolerant and open to alternative narratives about the past? This is important because otherwise the new generations do not learn from the past, and the new generations feel that a nation has to always be right. The nation is always the victim. In concluding, the issue, I think, the main issue when it comes to populism and how cultural rights can help is to ensure and to guarantee the diversity of ideas, to protect a diverse landscape, to prevent people to fall into informational bubbles, to fake news, like I saw earlier in a campaign in this university. It is not prohibited to influence public opinion, but what is prohibited is not for the state not to take measures to promote the human rights obligations the state has undertaken, and even more so to see that the state to say simplistic statements that go directly against the human rights statements, the human rights obligations the state has undertaken. And maybe the response is, yes, defending cultural rights, ensuring access and participation will minimize populism. But we also need to work more on the importance of cultural and political diversity landscape, and we may need more media regulation when it comes to hate speech from the state. In essence, we need the cultural rights approach to stand firm before any restriction or dilution of human rights. We just need to keep asking states through all channels, international channels, in conferences, local channels, regional challenge, to implement what they said they would, to take measures to materialize human rights for all. Thank you.